Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for coming this evening and for the sixth of our Digital Hub and NCID in Public Digital Cultures webinar series on emerging technologies. And I would like to extend a warm welcome to both our speakers, Carol Manton and Caroline Campbell, who will be discussing their research and use of AI technologies within their artistic practice. This talk series is convened by Dr. Rachel O'Dwyer, Visual Culture Lecturer at NCID, and myself, Elaine Hoey, Artist in Residence at the Digital Hub. Many thanks to Anne Kelly at the NCID Gallery, who is hosting our event tonight. So tonight's talk is centered around the theme of bias within AI and machine learning systems, and we'll be looking at this from both a feminist and queer perspective. And I would like to kick off this evening with a quote from one of my favorite, if not controversial writers, Donna Haraway. Technology is not neutral. We're inside of what we make and it's inside of us. We're living in a world of connections and it matters which ones get made and unmade. That's a quote from Donna Haraway in 1995. So the rise of AI-based systems was largely accompanied by the belief that these systems were impartial and would not suffer from biases that we humans do. However, it's become evident that both gender and racial bias exist in large numbers of these algorithmic systems. The question is where the bias is rooted, whose values and outcomes are we encoding into these systems, and what types of consequences can we see, and how are the artists beginning to explore and challenge some of the inherent problems within these emerging technologies. And tonight we are particularly interested in how contemporary discussions on gender and identity are shaping and influencing research in the field of AI. We will begin with a presentation from both our speakers, followed by a short Q&A in which we'll invite you, the audience, to ask questions and open up discussions surrounding some of the themes tonight. Please feel free to add your questions to the chat section. Our first speaker is Carol Manton. You're very welcome, Carol, who has been developing some really interesting. Carol Manton is an artist-technologist and game developer, one of my favorite. She is lecturer in the creative computing at Bath Spa University. Her practice includes XR, playable media, digital heritage, and design activism. She has worked in AAA and Indie gaming and is a qualified museum curator specialising in interactive and digital collections research. She's a live coder and has performed at Algoraves across UK and internationally. She performed and curated an Algorave which saw 800 people dancing to algorithms in the iconic British Library in London as part of the Staying Late at Library. Much of her work is focused on creating better relationships between technology and people. She's co-founder of Women Reclaiming AI, a conversational AI feminist voice assistant, which is being co-developed by a growing community of 100 women. She spoke at the United Nations Conference on Gender and AI. Carol's work has been featured in Ars Electronica, the Guardian newspaper, and she's led workshops at the Barbican for AI, More Than Human and MozFest. Carol, we're delighted to have you here tonight and very kind of interested to hear about the research that you've been doing around the area of kind of AI and bias. So we'll hand it over to you for your presentation and then we'll talk much more later.
Great, thank you. I'm just I have multiple screens, so if I suddenly look in a different direction, that's just because I've moved my Zoom onto a different screen. So let me just move that over here. And I want to present this full screen. Right, hopefully you can see that just fine. Yeah, my name is Carol Manton and fantastic to be here, and a really wonderful introduction there from Elaine. I am an artist-technologist. I work in multiple different fields and have various interests from game development to performance, but a lot of my work is focused around getting people not normally represented within technology communities involved in conversations and also making around technology. Today, I'm going to be talking about a project that I co-founded with my collaborator on many things, B. Arga, or Birgitta Arga, who's based now in Norway and can't be with me today, but I just thought I wanted to mention her as well. We work on various kind of projects together, all collaborative, all aimed at reclaiming conversational AI, artificial intelligence and systems, and thinking about using those as a medium for protest and activating people who are end users of those technologies to really take part in conversations around our future relationships with technology. So what is AI and why do we care? AI as a term it's a field of computer science. It's really a concept. It refers to how we can create a human-like intelligence within a computer, a robot, or other kind of machine, something that appears to be intelligent like a human. And now we hear the term AI all the time. We hear about it in terms of our future workplaces, our homes, our relationships. AI is everywhere. Although with AI, often we're referring to things like machine learning and deep learning. We're not necessarily thinking about the wider concept of AI. But when a normal kind of user starts to look into AI, a lot of what we are confronted with is this kind of imagery. So these have come from various kind of big institutions like the BBC, the Guardian, other kind of media outlets. And everything's all very networked. There's kind of big brains, there's robots, it's very masculine. There's a lot of kind of numbers and pointing and you know, it's all very kind of almost godlike. And if you were to do a Google image search now on the term artificial intelligence, these are the kinds of images that are thrown up. Robots, pointing, blue, networks, a lot of images that don't actually tell us anything. And this is one of the things that we are particularly kind of, I guess, concerned about is AI and its mythic status and total lack of explainability. A mythic status that stops us critiquing it, that stops us asking questions, that makes us think it's made by, you know, superhuman people very far away, not accessible to us. And diversity within the people making AI is a big problem. So in the UK, the women workforce makes up about 47% of the workforce, but only 17% of all available tech jobs in the UK are held by women. So not many people within these teams creating artificial intelligence systems are women. And then when you start to look at intersecting that with other types of statistics, and this one is related to race, the numbers get far, far worse. So this statistic is the number of Black women working for Google in their diversity report in 2019. So we're dealing with a disastrous lack of diversity in the AI industry. And this is something that's talked about a lot. It's something that's talked about within the industry as well. Melinda Gates of Microsoft said that we're baking bias into the systems by not having women at the seat of the table and also not having people of colour. So we haven't got these diverse voices within development teams. It's talked about in industry and out of industry as well. So for Women Reclaiming AI, we're very much focusing on conversational AI, which is kind of a branch of AI that is about kind of chatbots and voice assistants, things like Alexa, Siri, Google Home, products that you've probably heard of, if not used, or if not used regularly. So by 2023, it's forecasted that there will be 8 billion digital voice assistants in use around the world. And these will be at work, in your home, in your car, in lots of different places. And these chatbots are computer programs. They use artificial intelligence in that they use natural language processing to understand the users, what users are saying to the chatbot. And then the chatbot is capable of simulating a human-like conversation and sharing information to end users. And these can be a mixture of rule-based responses. So if somebody says this, the machine will respond with this, or be much more conversational, very predictive, constantly learning from past conversations to improve their responses. They can be something very simple, like buying something online, or they can hold much more in-depth conversations. And you're probably used to seeing them as these things that you might find in your home, like Amazon's Alexa to the Google Home. Now, most of these voice assistants, chatbots, are gendered as women. They default to female voices, and they often have female names. They are designed as women. But these devices are designed to be women because we're used to hearing women in assistant roles. We're used to women within our society being subservient, serving, carers. So we're much more used to hearing the female voices. So we're reinforcing these stereotypes by casting our AI assistants as women. However, if we go back to our previous statistics, we know that these voice assistants are being designed predominantly by men. And men are designing voice assistants in different forms, from the spark seekers we saw before to these kinds of chatbots that you might find online. Simple chatbots like ordering a pizza, to more complicated chatbots like Microsoft Show Ice, who's a social chatbot that Microsoft proudly says people fall in love with, receives declarations of love and marriage proposals. And Show Ice has had now around 30 billion conversations with 660 million humans. So 660 million humans on the planet have spoken to this Show Ice, thinking, you know, they're having potentially a friendship or love conversation, but actually talking to Microsoft. So what's the problem? What's the problem then when we have chatbots gendered predominantly as women that are designed overwhelmingly and scripted, programmed overwhelmingly by men? Well, the UN released a report in 2019. You can find and read this online. It's really interesting. And one of the sections of the report looked at voice assistants and some of the issues around voice assistants that are gendered women. And you can see from this table that some of the responses, so for example, if you were to say to Siri, you're a slut, Siri would respond, I'd blush if I could. In the UK, you might be used to hearing Siri as a male voice, or I don't know in Dublin, actually. That would be interesting to find out. But in America, where Siri was initially launched, Siri had a female voice. Similarly, if you said you're hot to Amazon's Alexa, Alexa would respond, that's nice of you to say. So rather than shutting somebody down for you know, saying something traditionally that might feel quite derogatory towards a woman or quite aggressive, these chatbots, they don't want to say no. You know, men don't really want women to say no to them, so they've programmed this into these chatbot systems. Research shows us that around 30% of inputs that users give to chatbots are abusive in nature. So you might think about, you know, people that you know who have written ridiculous things into a chatbot, or said silly things to your Alexa or your Google Home. Maybe they might have told Alexa to shut up, or things like that. But 30% of all inputs to chatbots are abusive in nature. And these include off-topic things, they include romantic responses, they also include highly sexualized responses. And what gets weirder about this is that the people making these bots designed as women, these bots that receive so much abuse, and these bots written predominantly by men, actually really don't want people to critique who is making them. They don't want people to ask questions about the teams behind these systems. This is from a leaked document from Apple, who makes Siri, to The Guardian. Apple developers were given specific instructions when writing for Siri. They want users of Siri to think that, you know, it wasn't designed by humans. It wasn't designed by a team of people at Apple. Siri isn't a human, and definitely isn't a human invention. And how odd is this, that we have this really biased set of responses, men designing idealized women chatbots and voice assistants that don't reflect a future that women want for themselves, and then also not want to be in any way accountable for these products that are being designed. So this is where our project really comes in. So we're asking questions. We want to think about, you know, what are the issues when we design AIs with personalities? Why do we need voice assistants to be human? Why do we need large corporations to create these kind of products so they can be friends with them? Isn't this quite a strange thing to do? And how does it change our future relationships? And as women, you know, do we really want years of gender stereotypes to just be amplified by technology, amplified and sold all around the world? So we started to think, you know, if you're going to use our voices, our personalities within your products, then we really want a say in what those things sound like. So we started this group called Women Reclaiming AI. Women Reclaiming AI is a collaborative female voice assistant, or the group is open to women and women identifying people to come together to really start to think about how we want to be represented in the future of technology. So we started traveling around, running kind of various workshops in which we created a platform for writing and editing our own chatbot. And there's now over 100 women writing this chatbot, which you can speak to our website, but also you can enable through a smart speaker as well and speak to it with voice. Through these workshops, we really wanted to start to think about building, you know, a feminist data set of women's language, women's ideas, and really start to create our own voice assistant that reflected our identity, written by women, not written by unaccountable men in these large companies. And through doing this, we were upskilling women, giving women some knowledge about what artificial intelligence is, about what conversational AI is, giving them the tools to take part in debates, conversations around these topics. Also the skills to build their own conversational AI products or chatbots, but also exploring collaborative working spaces for women. How do we create spaces where women feel comfortable and confident working in technology? And there's also an element of creative writing here. It's really interesting having this kind of collaborative approach to writing a female personality, you know, really thinking about a collective intelligence on feminism by talking to lots of diverse women to get their points of view of what a female personality should be. And then also a performative element, because at the end of the workshops, we all kind of talk to the chatbot as well, which is something that's kind of quite a fun thing to do. Within the chatbot is the language of the community, but also lots of quotes from women that the community admire as well. And you can look on our website if you'd like to find out about our future workshops and also talk to our voice assistant. In the future, we're hoping to open up the data set as well, because we've now got quite an interesting kind of data set based on women's language. Future things that we're doing, well, at the moment, actually, we're working on a project for creating a collective manifesto. So we're asking women and inclusive of, you know, non-binary, genderqueer, trans as well, to join with us and start to really think about how we want our future relationships with technology and specifically AI to work, how we want to be represented or not want to be represented, and starting to pull together a manifesto that we can share and talk to people and activate more people in this kind of conversation from which, you know, they're currently removed from. And then another project that we've started doing this year, we've become very interested in the environmental impact of artificial intelligence and the environmental impact of the internet in general, for positive and negative. Just the large amounts of energy and power that are used to power these systems, where that energy comes from. Is it coming from sustainable sources? Is it coming from fossil fuels? So we've been working on this project called Looking for the Cloud, which we're working on in collaboration with the Eden project in Cornwall, in which we're working with groups of young people to create a new story around understanding just how the internet works, how these streaming systems work. How is it that you're watching me on YouTube and I'm sitting in my room here? Where does the data travel in order for this video to get to you? And then also, how much energy does that use and where is that energy coming from? So I think that's about time for me. If you want to find out more about what we do and what we do at Women Reclaiming AI, please visit our website. You can also follow us on Twitter as well, where we talk about, you know, other projects that we're doing. And more than happy for you to get in contact with us if you want to talk about anything or want to even come and join our community as well.
Thank you very much, Carl. That was a really interesting talk. Very, very interested actually in kind of contacting you myself after this, just in regards to your workshops and just that kind of the socially engaged kind of part of your practice. So I'm going to, we'll talk a little bit more later. So the next part, we're going to have a chat with our Irish artist, Carolyn Campbell. And Caroline, at the minute, I think you're in London, are you? Or are you in Ireland?
I'm in Ireland, but I'm based in London.
Oh, you're in Ireland at the minute. Yeah, so I'll do a quick introduction to Caroline is an artist, writer, and filmmaker working under the name Loitering Theatre, both as a solo artist and with other collaborators. Loitering Theatre works across video, text, mixed messages, false flags, meme magic, artificial intellect, viral interface, and future archaeologies of time. Loitering Theatre has most recently presented work at Tulka Festival of Visual Arts Galway 2020, Centre Culturel Hollandaise, Paris, Solstice Gallery. Caroline is a practice-based PhD researcher at Goldsmiths University of London in the Department of Visual Cultures. And we're kind of really delighted to have you here tonight, Caroline, to speak about with AI, but within that kind of a broader context as well around the queering of technologies around identity and gender. So that's very exciting. So I'm looking forward to kind of hearing, and I'll hand it over to you now.
Thanks for having me, Elaine. I guess I should just start by saying some of the ideas I have here I've just kind of formulated on the fly, even in response to current political events. And I just kind of thought I'm going to try and move from the very particular about AI up to what I see as kind of structural issues that may not be so apparent, and that I think we will definitely Loitering Theatre's practice would try and take on, and at least at a minimum critique. So I'm not sure on the time of these slides, so hopefully I won't go over too long or else be too short. I have no idea, but we'll see how we get on. Yeah, so just to explain, Loitering Theatre are I guess it's a collaborative art practice, but also I work on my own as well, solo. I can describe it as a secretive and speculative art practice as well, where we kind of interrogate some of the power structures of contemporary capitalism and technology and its relationship with the military-industrial complex in whatever form that takes now. And a lot of the time that has involved critiquing or coming into contact with the actual physical locations of the technology companies or of network capitalism, particularly in Dublin, where we have a lot of the HQs of these companies here. And just, yeah, so just to explain a little bit more. So our name, Loitering Theatre, apart from having theatrics, is really related to the theatre of war. And it takes its name from this particular drone here, which is one that was designed to stay up. I don't know if it was ever made, but it was, well, you'd never know, it probably is up in the air as we speak. But it was designed to stay in the sky for a few years. It's a vulture drone, so a very high altitude, ultra endurance, Loitering Theatre, unmanned reconnaissance element. So that's where the name Loitering Theatre comes from. And this, I think, this was one of our first works. I'm not going to show it here, but just to give you an idea of it, which was a film we made with drones around that kind of Dublin Silicon Docks, where we used drones to kind of spy back on Facebook and Google in the HQs. And this was made in 2012. So I guess it was at a time when people didn't really have a full idea of what was going on with these guys. And it would be my contention that people still don't have a very complete idea of what's going on with these guys and what their potential relationship is to securitization systems and to whatever the contemporary version of the military and industrial complex is.
Caroline, can I just stop you there for a second? We just can't see your slides.
Oh, can you not? Sorry.
No. I have to go out. I'd love to see them. Sorry for interrupting you.
Yeah, share screen is on. Okay, so look again. I'll have to probably, is that okay now?
Yeah, that's perfect.
You see them now, yeah?
That's perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
That. And I'll just run through again. So Loitering Theatre, that's the actual drone that our name comes from. That was the first piece where we spied on Facebook and Google, who were very secretive then about their presence in Dublin. You couldn't actually even find the name of Facebook on the outside of the building. None of their addresses came up anywhere. You couldn't ring them even. Now, I guess thinking about AI, I kind of thought when I was researching AI, I was very interested to see, just at a very kind of particular level, some of the biases that were inherent in the databases. So this is a database from Princeton called WordNet, and it's actually where ImageNet got its structuring and labeling from. So it's kind of where the start of I guess the start of computer vision comes from, and the start of all the developers in AI that came in 2014. And actually, the relation, why I introduced the drone thing and Google and Facebook is because I think this is still relevant, very relevant to the discussion, because these are the people who hold these data sets still. They are held by these big tech companies. And that's how AI has become possible, because Amazon, Facebook, and Google have all been able to gather all this data to facilitate the training of AI. But when you look at how some of the models, when the AI is trained, you can just see how they would describe, this is the WordNet from Princeton. I was shocked when I saw this, actually. A woman is an adult female person. The woman kept house while the man hunted. Now that's in WordNet in Princeton, right? Still up online, you can all look at it. Woman, fair sex, woman is the glory of creation. The fair sex gathered on the veranda. So just all these kind of things are really at its root embedded in there within the construction of computer vision. Just taking an example from this now, if I do a search on B-girls, right? I don't get, I get like the kind of hip hop girls I'm expecting to get, hip hop women and girls I'm expecting to get who are involved in the hip hop scene and interested in breakdancing. If I go back to WordNet, I see a B-girl as a woman employed by a bar to act as a companion to men customers, right? Now that's pretty shocking that that's inherently in art, the systems that built the artificial intelligence we're looking at now, right? So that stuff worries me, and I think people understand the biases in it. I think, Coral's obviously has shown that she's working to try and some way to counteract this stuff. But I think as well that you need to think, take it up a bit and abstract it a bit, and think about the people who hold the data sets as well, and the implications, the fact that they hold the data sets and the relationship with, say sort of the NSA or with, and by virtue of that, with the military-industrial complex, what that kind of might mean for minorities or women or queers or anybody who doesn't fit the mainstream patriarchal narrative. Now you will find as well, like there's a lot of lean-in feminism in these companies. There's a lot of pinkwashing in these companies, right? But at the same time, you can see here, Google's head, Regina Duggan, joins Facebook to start DARPA-inspired teams. This woman was one of the directors of DARPA, which is a kind of American military technology wing, right? So there's very close relationships between the American military technology wing and these companies, right? Which is what we need to think about if they're the people who are controlling AI, right? Would we prefer a more democratic scenario where it's not so, it's not in the hands of military interests. It's not driven by military interests. It's driven by something else, like maybe kindness, This is kind of like, you see, one of the Google companies, one of the Alphabet companies that were called Moonshot, but have now changed their name to X Company. And Moonshot would also be like the kind of typical name for DARPA projects. These projects with DARPA put loads and loads of money in to try and solve these technological problems in the interest of war. Now, we get good things out of them. We got GPS out of them. But I don't think people are aware when they're looking at these technologies that are coming to fruition, what is the background to them? And that's usually military in its initial funding and its initial drive, when it's at the real high-tech point of it, when it's like at the real cutting edge. Now, to look at that for me is to think about, so there's a British DARPA has just been founded as well by no other than Dominic Cummins, right? So it's everywhere. And I don't think we think about it properly when we think, I remember having to try and explain to people that Google and Facebook were taking their data, and and that they weren't necessarily just, a do no evil company. And it was a very hard conversation to have with people to try and convince them that there was an issue there. And similarly, it's hard for people to see what could be behind the scenes. It's not all the time, but it's just definitely, it's a driving force in technology that we need to be aware of. And if we could get feminist approaches to change that, that would be great, right? So you can see Dominic Cummings, has got his British DARPA, the same equivalent of the one in the States. I think that's to see, yeah. So I just flick forward a little bit. I saw this I read the Daily Mail, guys, hand up. But this is like from the whiteboard of the COVID talks in the UK, of the government COVID planning. And I was just so upset to see this. It says, who do we not save? Like as something that's being factored into a decision-making process. And that's all part of that whole, Dominic Cummings publishing this, sitting down around the table doing this. And that whole, do you want the same sort of people deciding what goes into AI? I would think not, right? Within AI as well, I find it kind of interesting, just at that kind of abstracted level. So not only have you got this kind of unquestioned relationship with contemporary capitalism and its ally always the military-industrial complex, and whatever version it is now, but you also kind of have these kind of, for the most part, like, white males who are like the inventors of all this stuff. That has changed now, I realize. There's a lot of women involved in AI, but just the origin stories of AI is often, coming from this male imaginary, this patriarchal imaginary. There typically is a relationship to God, a relationship to some sense of the afterlife, or, in that, they might be able to pickle their brains and in a transhumanist kind of creation technology system, be able to, come back again in some version. That's obviously the kind of most, it's almost a cliche now at this stage, but there's definitely a kind of a creator's narrative in all this, which is, once again, I think creating a kind of a hierarchical structure when we, ideally we would work towards not having hierarchies and structures in place, because through hierarchical structures, they work off difference and they manage to other people, right? So I think that needs to be interrogated as well. So you see it as well, like Ray Kurzweil, who was the chief technologist for Google, with the Age of Spiritual Machines. It's about this kind of that they're creating some kind of, I guess, other entity. And you'll see it like at its most extreme in the thought of Nick Land, who would even see capitalism as already that entity. And you know what, I wasn't kind of uninterested in the idea of the other entity. And I was interested in the idea because obviously when you get down to the hidden layers of AI, you don't really know what's going on, and it's esoteric. And I'm interested in the esotericism of AI and what that might mean. And I guess that's something I've tried to bring into the practice, to look at, what kind of other way might we envisage the esotericism of AI kicking off and becoming something, when it emerges, something new and different, and not necessarily just some sprawling, crazy form of capitalism that's going to like trade us all in for a few paper clips and kill us, right? So I guess the work tries to think of what would happen if we thought about it through kind of more feminist, queer, mystical, other forms of esotericism, shamanism, different types of belief systems that would lie very much outside the Christian patriarchal norm, and to think about what that might look like if you brought AI into the mix with that as another entity that we were bringing into being. If we were the bootloader for AI, what would happen if we were the bootloader for some sort of beautiful creature, or some sort of kind creature, a kind entity. So I guess that's I made them these two words. So that I guess then when you see kind of the Nick Lands of the world, you see the Nick Bostroms, and then all these kind of so I guess they're the Oxford thinkers, they're highly funded, and the Dominic Cummings will be pushing them, and kind of the British government will be pushing them. And I guess they probably get the same thing in the States. It's all these guys kind of getting pushed to make these things that are like have use for military. And then you got the other side, which are kind of typically kind of like a lot of them are female thinkers like Haraway, Rosie Berdotti, kind of thinking about a moving not transhumanism, but towards a kind of like a critical post-humanism where which I just don't think has the same concerns, and definitely has more of a feeling of I'm just going to be easier and just say kindness again, I probably could explain it to in better terms, in more complicated terms, if complicated is better. But I guess there's a hope with Berdotti, and there's no hope with some of these. Well, unless your hope is a militarized feature, it doesn't seem to be the kind of thing I want to see in the world. So this is a piece I made where I kind of imagined what it would be like if I was making an artificial intelligence, and I was training an artificial intelligence in other ways of thinking. And it's kind of riffing off, if you look on a lot of the kind of, if you look at the boards on 4chan or when I was there, and like, you see some of the kind of like hero worship of Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, by a lot of the kind of incel crowd, or a lot of the right-wing gang now, so I kind of wanted to reimagine that, and reimagine what a kind of what a cabin in the woods might look like, or a shed somewhere where a queer feminist AI was being born. And so inside, I say it's a bad quality picture, but so inside there's what I call Loiterbot, and she's being trained on, I guess she's been trained by like a different mindset. So she's been trained by Maria Sabina, who's a Mexican Oaxacan shaman, about her ideas. And she's been trained by Comandante Roma, one of the Mexican Zapatista women as well, Mexican Zapatista leaders. So I'm interested in the combination of kind of left-wing thought and spirituality, and I don't see them as being unreconcilable. And I guess, yeah, it's just trying to think this piece is actually called Towards New Amazon, thinking about the figure of the Amazon woman, the Amazon fighter, and obviously thinking about the Amazon that we have now in Jeff Bezos's version of the future, who also, of course, has a huge data set and the possibility of doing AI, and just think about what another type of reincarnation of the Amazon might look like. So just to conclude, now this is kind of long, so I hope it's okay. And you can, if this is just like showing you what the woman, what the Loiterbot is training on, and she's training on a video made at the Shannon Women's Peace Camp, where women were gathering to protest the presence of American military that moved through Shannon Airport in Ireland. And for those who are watching from abroad, Ireland is meant to be a neutral country, a peaceful neutral country, and we aren't meant to have American troops bases here. But at the same, yet American troops are visibly passing through Shannon Airport in uniform as the planes refuel and go on to fight wars in other countries. And so it hasn't ever been subject to referendum. It hasn't ever been discussed in the country. It's kind of a dirty secret. And I guess this video is kind of a celebration of the women, holding a vigil there for peace. And this is what Loiterbot watches in order to train herself up on what she needs to know in terms of becoming an emergent intelligence. We'll just play this for you guys now. Right. Hey guys. That's it.
Thank you very much, Caroline. That was great. I've seen this piece a few times. I love it. So we just, yeah, I don't know whether I can turn on my camera. My internet is quite shocking this evening. So I just thought I'd start with and invite kind of Carol back to the conversation, if that's okay. I was going to just kick off with a question from the chat section actually first. Just in regards to, do you think technology, particularly AI, is subtly changing human behavior and therefore by default our own collective and individual agency? can, either of you, that's for both. It says just for both. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear.
Oh, yeah.
I think I'll start. Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, I think is the short answer. AI is subtly changing human behaviour, and that's in lots of different ways. I think it's changing. There's kind of examples about research of the positioning of smart speakers in your homes, so like your voice assistants, and people changing the types of conversations that they have in different rooms. So people are going to say something particularly private. They, you know, if they've got a voice assistant in their kitchen, they might go into like the hallway to have that conversation, and like, you know, odd sort of small changes to behavior in that sense. Also predictive technologies, so predictive AI systems might change the way that we learn, the way that we retain information. Services that are AI enabled are changing the way we start relationships, the way we talk to each other, the kind of media that we're exposed to, the types of news that we're exposed to. You know, things like, you know, recommendation systems on things like, you know, like streaming services might push us towards particular programs, or might even just keep us hooked on our screens much longer. So I think there are kind of, you know, multiple examples out there. I'd be interested in the long-term impact of some of those. I don't think that's widely known at the moment. There might be some research into that, but I often think about my young nephew, who, since he could talk, has been talking to, for example, a Google Home in his house. So he's, you know, there's been AI products around him, you know, since he was sort of, I guess, able to use language. So, you know, how will that impact people kind of growing up in those positions now, similarly to the way we talk about young people who have always had some kind of presence on social media and things like that. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. I think that's covered that question. Unless, Caroline, do you want to add anything to that? Would you have? So the question was, do you think technology, particularly AI, is subtly changing human behavior and therefore both our collective and individual agency?
Well, it's so ubiquitous now. Of course it is, you know, because it's so embedded in everything. So I just kind of guess I think Coral kind of said it there in a better way than I could, but yeah, it definitely is, you know. That's
what I thought. Yeah, so I have a few other questions for you, if you don't mind. Suppose the first one I'd like to start off is, we see contemporary conversations around gender and identity really beginning to kind of challenge the limitations of data in terms possible in general to address historical or confirmation bias and stop these moving from one system to another. And I'll come to a thing that you talked to me about, Caroline, later, about this idea of glitching, you know, systems that glitch and space for that. But in general, do you think it's possible that this is stopped, or are we stuck with this system and we have to find ways to break it? That's for either.
Well, I just think we could also kind of, like, I thought Carol's work was really interesting. I really liked it, creating the, you know, a different data set. I've been always really interested in that idea. It's brilliant to see it happening. But yeah, I guess I would also, even in a small way, try and do that. It just, even, you know, even when you think, like, I was doing actually a Zoom call performance before, where I had I'd live avatars on it, people performing live avatars of, say, Rosa Luxemburg or Countess Markovitz or whatever, and on the call. And I thought it was interesting because obviously Rosa Luxemburg was in character, Countess Markovitz was in character, and other kind of women of the left or feminist figures. And I just thought it was interesting because I was using a program, just a very simple program on an iPhone called Avatarify to get the images into Zoom, you know, the live animated photographs of Rosa Luxemburg, etc. And so I had that AI on the go. And then I also, because you know, for accessibility issues, we had Otter AI as well. And you know, at first I'd be like, oh, I don't even want to add any more AI onto this, you know. But I just thought about it, like when it's taking part, it's listening to other ideas, you know. So if it takes part and it listens to people talking about, we were talking about actually, you know, a historic protest as part, you know, a historic protest by one of the Irish feminists that took place at the US Embassy against the Vietnam War. And we were discussing, you know, kind of various issues around memories of protest. And I think if it's listening to that, it's got to be helpful, right? And if it's listening to, say, somebody voicing in character, voicing Rosa Luxemburg's opinions or whatever, you know, it's just, or Cantor Markovitz, like that's, if they're the voices it hears, it's kind of interesting. Now, I once was hanging out with somebody who was like a significant Irish feminist who had just got a Siri, you know, and was asking Siri who it knew from the Irish feminist movement. And I really didn't know anyone. And that was kind of a sad moment, you know. And I thought about then, you know, how am I trying to change that? And I'll actually probably maybe talk to Coral afterwards about how to try and see, can you alter that? Can you teach it who these women are and what their ideas are? But yeah, it's just about trying to expose, I wonder when it gets exposed to other ideas, is it enough to try and kind of transform its way of thinking, or is the embedded bias just too much for it to shift? So that's kind of interesting. I guess that's part of the emergent properties of it, you know?
I think that's there's a lot of issues of kind of, you know, historic data sets. So similarly to what Caroline was saying about you know, if you're currently working off a data set that excludes certain voices, and those voices, you know, the example of Irish feminists, but also or kind of key academics that are overlooked, not, you know, hugely represented, but also, you know, data sets, language, faces, all kinds of human data. If it's already built on something that's historically non-representative, adding representation then I think takes quite a long time and a certain amount of conscious effort, and also conscious effort by a relatively small group of people who are currently building, you know, these systems. So yeah, and I think that's kind of a huge problem that we're dealing with at the moment. We can kind of identify what some of the issues are, but we, you know, we all, I think sometimes it almost feels like we're, you know, going back from working from scratch a little bit, I suppose, because everything, you know, when we're training things on huge amounts of data, so we're training facial recognition on you know, the billions of faces that we see on Instagram or whatever. How are we then kind of, I guess, curating those? How are we making sure that our data sets are fair, but then also recognizing that data is actually inherently biased, and actually a lot of what we need to do is educate people, start talking to people about how these systems actually work, and then allowing people to critique the kind of responses that these systems give. For example, like, why have I been given this credit score? Why is this, you know, what does this number mean? Why are there any potential biases here? How is this going to affect my future? Rather than being in a situation where we kind of accept these results because we don't really understand the mechanisms by which they were reached. But I think it's definitely you know, loads of really important conversations at the moment around you know, feminism, around queer identity within technology, and also the potential for you know, having new types of understanding by viewing or creating products centered on these more marginalized points of view. But you're constantly kind of building on a history that is very patriarchal, very white, very dominated by one, you know, relatively small section of people.
And I think another thing is that people only really kind of notice or have a potential for noticing it. Like, because I noticed with surveillance, first of all, that there was a time lag, a good decade-long time lag before the general public, you know, whatever, it became more of an issue that people were aware of. And I wonder with this as well, is it only when it starts, you know, causing problems in your life with like ubiquitous deployment, which is kind of the point we're near, you know, we're pretty much getting there now, you know what I mean, that people can start, you know, having issues with it, but then it's too late. It's really embedded, you know, and no, you know what I mean? So it's.
I always feel it's really interesting, like how much we kind of trade off for kind of convenience and the number of things that we're aware of. Like I guess a lot of us are aware of surveillance. A lot of us are, you know, aware of advertising just constantly on our machines. We're also aware that a lot of these products are released at a point in which they're not really working properly. The number of people who buy smart speakers that don't understand their accent and things like that. And, you know, we do kind of, I feel like we're in this sort of constant trade-off with technology. And it is kind of, I don't know, we do seem to, you know, put up, I guess, with an awful lot for this trade-off of convenience and an idea of progress, an idea of the future. And it does feel like we need, you know, more people definitely to become kind of critically engaged with those things and actually focused on them, rather than just having this noise around us where we understand there's advertising, there's surveillance, there's things going on, but we're kind of ignoring them so we can have that convenience and that desire for new technology and new gadgets and new kind of things in our lives.
I think as well, just and it's something you both touched on in your talk, was this idea of this almost spiritual, like being AI was kind of being sold as something that's quite inscrutable, almost like, you know, it doesn't exist, but it exists anyway. So, and I think you both spoke about that, this AI that you can't really pin down what it is, so that by having it so complex in its, or so kind of mystified, that people kind of go, oh, I can't really understand that, so I'm not going to touch it, or I'm not, you know, it's beyond my understanding or my comprehension as an ordinary person. And I think there's a lot of deep mystifying needed in and around this technology. And whether that's true, the likes of Caroline, your kind of work where you almost go the opposite, you kind of over identify with it in order to kind of reveal those kind of characteristics. Or Carol, you know, the work that you're doing in kind of engaging in kind of social practice. So I find this idea of demystifying something like this obviously really kind of crucial to people even wanting to begin to think about it. It's almost like it's just a step too far for people to think about. You're just going, oh, this is too much, you know, I can't figure it out, so I'm not going to bother. So I think, as you say, more education for me is crucial. And I also think it's a very, very difficult technology. You know, so few women go into it because we're just not even, like, you know, from school upwards, I know in Ireland anyway, you're just not geared towards programming or coding, or, you know, you're just pushed towards home economics, you know.
Actually, Elaine, though, there's huge amounts of women in AI, and in Ireland, like if you go out to the Insight Centre at DCU, there's lots of women out there. I'm so surprised. It's a real area women are gravitating towards.
Yeah, but it's not translating down. Yeah, it's not translating into the art world as yet. It's definitely,
yeah, not in the art world, but into tech world, it's like there's a lot of women in it. But I just think it's so, like, it's not going to be like, you know, pulling out an Arduino board or something like that. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not something that you're just going to be, well, I would, you know, you or me are going to be having a bash at it, I don't think, Elaine, you know what I mean? At the level of getting in and observing it, like Coral obviously can do that. Well, I'm like, it's tricky, you know?
It is, but I still think that it needs to happen. It's something that actually just needs to happen, and it needs to be taught at a very young level. It needs to be taught, and girls need to be encouraged to become kind of more au fait with the language that they're kind of engaging with there, because I do think that, you know, you're just propagating generations of the same stereotypes if we don't actually begin to really do a national plan in which to engage with this. You know, this technology is not going away. If anything, it's going to become much more embedded in our everyday lives and how we live our lives, the software we use, the cars we drive, the clothes, the choices we make. So I think it's something that's really vital, beyond just even learning the technology, but the conversations. And they're the hard ones to get into kind of at a very young age, because, you know, kids are going, this is great, I don't have to actually learn how to spell, you know, I've got predictive text. Sorry, that wasn't even a question, that was me just involved in the conversation. So there's a couple of other questions here, and about this idea of exposing bias in systems is really the first step to recognizing that there is a problem. And I think creative practice can offer a way to conceptualize forms of resistance that science and the tech industry just can't. And I think that's the beauty of where art comes in. And, you know, where do you see your work in regards to that particular idea of it being a sort of an act of resistance, or, you know, social protest almost? Either of you.
I kind of, so my practice is centered around kind of creative uses of technology to, I suppose, critique the wider kind of technology industry, and using creative technology and a lot of tools made within the creative and artistic community, and tools designed to be more accessible than some of the kind of other software kind of coding platforms that might be out there. So tools designed to get people working in this space, and to use those as a way for people to kind of get into thinking about technology, and thinking about, you know, the people who make these tools, and people who make these tools are humans, and they're humans just like we are. They just might have access to different, you know, parts of education and things like that. And I think one of the big issues is, you know, when you've got you know, your phone, and it's quite difficult to you can't really take this apart, you can't really see how this works, you can't it's very difficult to think about how data gets here, how is it stored, where is it coming from, all those kinds of things. So even just to start with, you know, kind of basic workshops around just how technology sort of works is really interesting, how much that then gets people thinking and discussing and looking at other areas of their lives. One of the things with Women Reclaiming AI is we go to lots of different places. Sometimes we go to arts venues, sometimes we go to technology venues, but we've also worked with lots of different community groups. We did one workshop with a homeless charity in Plymouth, and a group of women there who sort of said, well, what's this got to do with me? What's AI? What's automation? What's any of this got to do with me? And then we started to talk about their experiences, and actually, you know, experiences within the local community, experiences within accessing services, experiencing just the fact that, you know, shops disappearing from the high street, all of these things linked to automation. So even just starting with some really basic discussions and, you know, little bits of making and accessible tools around technology, suddenly people just start to see the world around them slightly differently. And I think that's kind of, you know, the start to change happening. And I think that's probably the central kind of part of the activism around our practice, is this kind of participation. And through this participation, kind of, you know, the start of, I guess, change, but also a real consciousness around relationships with technology, and also relationships with the humans who make those technology services.
Caroline, do you want to add anything there, or?
No. It's just,
You're okay?
it's interesting. Like, insert, just to give, there's a big, you know, that's, you're chipping away at, like, it's just such a big undertaking, though. You know what I mean? It's super. I love the idea of going in and that happening. I think it's really great. But I suppose that's with all activism, and, you know, trying to get the idea across to people. It's just like, it's, you know, it's just, I don't know, it just seems like this, it's a huge undertaking. I mean, it's brilliant.
Yeah. And I absolutely understand what you mean. You know, these, I guess the software, the companies, the technology just seems to just grow exponentially, constantly. And even through COVID, you know, everything, like, just, you know, the reliance that we have on technology, our relationship with technology, technologies, and I'm interchanging that with AI, and that kind of spread into more and more communities, more and more age groups, being really reliant on services. And then also the power of these kind of companies just growing and growing, and their wealth growing. And it does kind of feel, you know, sometimes doing these kind of grassroots actions, it is kind of like, you know, what real impact is this having, you know, like, measuring that. But, you know, that the education, you know, needs to start somewhere. And I do think with this grassroots kind of approach, you know, it can grow and grow and grow. And it does feel slow. You know, when you look at the statistics, you know, we're not moving fast enough. The number of women going into computer science and education is really not changing fast enough. And that's just women. That's just one issue of diversity. But yeah, so I really appreciate what you're saying. And sometimes, like this morning on the news thing, like Amazon buying the MGM, the people who make Bond, you're just like, for, you know, however many, 8 billion, and you're just like, oh no, it's everywhere, you know, more and because these companies have so much power and going in so many different directions. So our ability to critique, you know, people that seem to have a monopoly over so much different types of media and purchasing and marketing, and it, you know, there's so much, it does feel overwhelming. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think there's kind of an issue around digital media literacy not being taught, or not being, you know what I mean, that there's just a general, all this technology has been foisted on people, especially kind of if they're older generations, and they don't really know how to look behind the scenes, I think. Yeah,
and the separation, I think there's this big problem with STEM and arts. I know there's a lot of talk around STEAM, but kind of separating the skills, the critical thinking skills of the arts and the humanities, and then separating that off from STEM.
Yeah, definitely.
And pushing a lot of people down the STEM route, which is great to get involved in technology and learn those things, but we need to go hand in hand with our kind of critical skills that we learn in arts and humanities as well. And it sometimes feels that, you know, just because we see those two things as separate, we almost don't expect people working in tech to think about ethics, or to think about, you know, kind of have that kind of, you know, critical thinking about how is this bunch of hardware and software going to impact people and lives and relationships and society, because we almost kind of separate these two things out, which, you know, is feels like at a young person's education level is happening more and more, and definitely something that we need to
I think
reverse.
That's important. It's an interesting idea. I haven't really thought about that before, but it is. It's like they're kind of kept separate, especially as you get really into, you know, the kind of science and the tech end of things. And it would be great to bring to bring the criticality of the kind of arts and humanities into it. Definitely be great.
Caroline, that this is a question for you, if you don't mind. When we spoke initially, and it was just a topic I wanted to quickly address this evening. We talked initially, we were chatting about this book called Glitch Feminism, and you had said, you know, this is an amazing kind of almost manifesto as well. And I don't know, Carl, you probably know the book too, by Legacy Russell. And, you know, I was in trance, and I went and looked at videos, and I'd read kind of some of her others, her other writings, but she talks about this idea of the glitch in the body, and the mechanical glitches forces us to think about the space, and that allows us to see where systems succeed and fail. And she describes this as a sort of a machinic mutiny, a kind of non-performative space that creates a space for people to try out their own identities. And I was just wondering, could you tell me a little bit more about the impact on a Caraway, but better, on your own practice, and how you're kind of using some of her theories within your own practice?
But I guess I only read that book recently, and I kind of thought about it more just I guess just to go off topic a bit from that. I've been thinking about embodiment, and, you know, how you might embody an algorithm, you know, and how, you know, how the algorithm might penetrate your flesh, and, you know, it become, you know, how might the boundary between you and the algorithm might go. And I did a piece where I performed as an algorithm that was, I did it with, you know, pulling in images from Google Street Maps, traveling through Dublin, performing an algorithm assessing, you know, what it thought of Dublin within a kind of capitalist context, or valuing it, or deciding what was done with the city. You know, and I did that actually in a kind of in the uniform of kind of securitization, and I guess I felt it was actually like the kind of uniform you would see kind of more used by riot police. And I kind of felt like it was a kind of like a shell body for the algorithm, what the algorithm might wear. And we just had to think, if like a kind of if a fintech algorithm was coming into town, how would we expect it to be embodied? What would we expect it to look like if it did take bodily form?
And did it have a gender, or did you go past that? Were you able to kind of push past this idea of, you know, what Carl talked about earlier, this idea of the patriarchal kind of white male dictating that the AI assistant is a female, you know, so the idea that, and Donna Haraway discussed it too, we can use technology to go past this idea of gender, or genitive norms, let's say.
Yeah, I you know.
So did you kind of go down that route?
Well, I started off like kind of in my head going like I wasn't really particularly gendered, but I did feel because with the performance of the algorithm assessing things, I was like categorizing people in the gallery, you know, according to, you know, just shading, or not, you know, not obviously actually just like kind of edge borders, not actually kind of like based on actual race or anything like that, obviously, but as I did it, it felt really aggressive, right? And it felt very masculine. And I ended up, you know, kind of shouting and becoming that algorithm, and what the, you know, that classification system, I guess what it is, yeah, so when you're inherently classifying things, when you're separating people into you're this, you're that, you're the other, it's implicitly, you're operating within these hierarchical systems, and it, you know, it implicitly felt patriarchal, and it implicitly felt very masculine. Of course, I'm in that uniform as well. So it was incredibly hard not to feel like an aggressive patriarchal masculine presence.
Do you think that that's that we've just that we're of a generation that's actually built into our heads? And do you think that there's another generation on the way that won't think the same way, that have a broader view of, you know, they haven't been brought up where women have to, you know, I was born in the 70s, so like women could, you know, if you had a baby, you had to leave work until 1970. So, you know, different generations will have different experiences. So I'm wondering, is that experience different for younger women now? Coral, you might know that more than I do.
I think it very much depends on your backgrounds and obviously like your geography. I think we're probably talking in quite a European sort of Western centric point of view, but also yeah, like a lot of it to do with so many different kind of factors in the way that you're growing up, in the way that you kind of approach your own gender, you think about your gender, the way you express your gender. But I am really excited about, you know, a lot of the work, especially young people are doing around kind of redefining gender, around thinking, you know, quite deeply about their own gender expression, and pushing boundaries in those spaces. And I really feel, you know, there's a lot of excitement there, and I'm interested to see, I guess, how it develops and how then it kind of permeates out into, you know, wider culture as well, and impacts, you know, other generations. I do wonder, it's an interesting question in terms of like building on this kind of historical data set is huge, you know, thinking about it from a technology point of view. So this huge kind of patriarchal white Western sort of data sets. So when we start to sort of build on that with new gender expressions, how much impact that has, and how quickly it can change things for a majority of women. One of the things I'm always interested about with women reclaiming AI and chatbots is especially with voices, the first thing that people say is, oh, well, why don't we just make it genderless? And actually trying to design something that's genderless is really hard. And the first thing people do is modulate voices, so it can be between like a male and a female voice. But often if you do that, the default is other, and the other default is woman. So, you know, currently it's really hard, especially when you're thinking about personality and voice, to design something that is genderless. But I think it's definitely a really interesting space. And yeah, it'd be nice to see kind of who the innovators are in the future, thinking about, you know, what kind of language are we going to have when we interface with machines, because we're going to carry on doing that. You know, if we carry on with our kind of current use of computing, we are going to carry on with some kind of a language-based interface with machines beyond, you know, writing code, like a natural language. So it's going to be really interesting to see, you know, how that could develop based on more interesting expressions of gender and things like that.
Excellent. I have one final question, and it's more just to wrap up, really, because I think we've gotten way over time. It's 25 minutes over time. Sorry, guys, but it was so interesting. And the last question is, I began with a kind of a quote from Donna Haraway, and I'm interested in, you know, some of her early writings in relation to technology and gender, and some of the stuff that we've been discussing. Do you think, you know, and I suppose this is more about thinking about it in an optimistic way, or, you know, critical but optimistic. Do you think technology, you know, even after all this discussion, has the potential to transform anything, human identity, you know, or are we putting too much into, you know, that kind of utopian technological dream? Caroline, I'll go. Yeah, it was like roulette there for a second.
It's a very big question, right? So I don't know. I always think what's interesting about technology is that it's dual use, you know, a lot of the time. And just to come back to, or originated from dual use objects. So there's just like dual use technology. So it's like a lot of it is driven by the military, right? So you get these things that are good, but they're also bad. You know what I mean? So I think that conflict is always kind of inherent within technology. And like a lot of the stuff DARPA has funded is amazing, right? And if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have it. And so there's that all the time. You know what I mean? So, but then obviously it's being used as tools of war. If
So it's a catch-22, really, you know. So there's always, as Carl mentioned, a technological trade-off somewhere happening. You know?
Yeah, I think it's really inherent in it, you know, that it can just be used for good or bad. I think it's, you know, it's our tool, you know what I mean? So it's probably quite a bit reflective of us, you know.
I'm always kind of wary about people saying, you know, technology did this. You know, I always kind of go, really, there's no, like, there's people behind this, and we always have to remember that we have choices, and we have the ability to make choices as humans, not to engage with something, and that it isn't just, you know, technology is just a piece of ubiquitous hardware. Getting less so with AI and neural networks. They're literally going to be learning, you know, they're learning themselves, so it's a lot more powerful. But before this, you know, technology is something that we can choose to engage with, so we have control. And what about you, Carl? Do you think it still has the potential to perform in a positive way, you know, transform kind of our lives?
Yeah, I agree in that it does both things. I think, you know, technology is built within a society and reflects, you know, whatever that society is back at us. And, you know, there are lots of people building, you know, different kinds of services that have so much potential for good. So within, you know, artificial intelligence, medical innovation in understanding our world, understanding more about science, understanding more about climate, in innovation, like even just, you know, being able to model and predict behaviors based on, you know, like understanding the coronavirus pandemic, stuff like that has been huge, helping us to, you know, communicate better, helping us to be more efficient in lots of different ways, helping us to move traffic around our cities efficiently, all of these like really amazing tools. But yeah, there is always, with so many things, there is a trade-off. I think they're built within our society, within, you know, a capitalist construct, within a colonialist, within a patriarchal. So there's all these, you know, issues around that changes our view of technology, and we can't just look at technology in a completely utopian way. Most of the technology that we kind of interface with is you know, built by, you know, corporations focused on making lots of money. So, you know, there's I think there's always going to be that trade-off. But ultimately, I think that you know, there is so much potential and so much kind of possibility around, you know, the types of things that we're learning all the time, and learning about the world around us through using technology. But it's just kind of maintaining a criticality, and sometimes I think changing the narratives around just constant progress. And maybe like having points at which we choose alternative narratives, and having the critical awareness to do that, rather than kind of getting caught up in this constant progression of you know, technology.
That's great. That's a really good way to end the evening. I want to thank you both very much for joining us tonight. Really fascinating conversation, and literally there's about 10 webinars just in any one of the topics that was discussed tonight. It's quite, you know, and I'm sure this isn't you know, this is literally just the very tip of the iceberg, really. I do think that it's something that will need to be revisited over and over as it becomes much more embedded. So thank you very much for joining us. I'd just like to let everybody know the next session on will include forensic architecture, and Ava Jagger and Mercedes Buns from the Serpentine Gallery in London. So join us for the next session on June the 10th. Thank you very much.